Ladies and gentlemen, you see, people like to think that narcissists go on with their lives unbothered after they've trampled others. Calm, smug, untouchable. But the truth is far more complex, far more tragic. These individuals often carry a hidden burden, a psychological residue that festers beneath the mask they've meticulously constructed. It's a secret regret, one so deeply repressed that even they can't articulate it. And that's the price of lying to oneself for too long. Now let's break it down. A narcissist constructs their identity not on truth, but on grandiosity. A fragile, inflated self-image designed to defend against deep feelings of inadequacy and shame. So when they harm someone, especially someone who trusted them, they do so not because they're confident, but because they're terrified. They fear vulnerability. They fear being exposed as insufficient. And that fear drives them to dominate, to manipulate, to preserve their illusion at all costs. But here's where the psychological fracture occurs. Deep down at some level not easily accessed by conscious thought, they know. They know they've betrayed something sacred, trust, connection, responsibility. And although they may not cry or apologize, although they may sneer or rationalize or discard you with chilling indifference, that doesn't mean there's no consequence. There's a reason they struggle to maintain stable relationships, a reason their lives often spiral into chaos. It's because there's an internal reckoning, a confrontation with their own conscience they are perpetually trying to escape. Guilt is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's buried beneath layers of denial and intellectualization, but it's there. When they wake up alone, when the admiration fades, when they're confronted with the wreckage of relationships they couldn't sustain, there's a pang, momentary perhaps, but real, a flash of truth that slips through the cracks of their defenses. It's the understanding, however fleeting, that they've become the very thing they feared most. Weak, unlovable, fraudulent. This regret, it's not about missing you necessarily. It's about missing the version of themselves they were when you believed in them. That feeling of being seen as good, worthy, loved. And when they lose that reflection, they are forced to stare into the void of who they really are without your light. That's when the internal chaos amplifies. That's when they double down on deception or spiral into depressive collapse. Either way, they can't unsee what they did and what that says about them. And so they live in a prison of their own making. The bars are built not of your rejection, but of their own betrayal of the better self they could have been. That's the cost of narcissistic injury. It's not just inflicted outward, it boomerangs inward. Slowly, quietly, persistently. What does that mean for you? It means that your pain wasn't meaningless. It was real. And the wound it left echoes in the person who caused it, even if they'll never say it. Especially because they never say it. Especially because they never say it. And that silent torment is often the cruelest justice of all. Narcissists, at their core, construct their entire identity not on a foundation of genuine self-awareness or humility, but on a fragile, inflated sense of self-importance. This self-image is built as a defense mechanism to ward off feelings of deep inadequacy and profound insecurity. In a sense, they create an illusion of strength and invulnerability to protect themselves from the devastating truth that they, like all of us, are flawed and imperfect. This inflated self-image allows them to present themselves to the world as superior, confident, and in control. They need to be seen this way, as if the acknowledgement from others affirms the narrative they desperately cling to. But here's the crux of the matter. This image, while seemingly powerful on the surface, is incredibly fragile. It's a mask, a façade that can easily crack if they're confronted with situations or interactions that challenge their constructed sense of superiority. Deep down, narcissists live in a constant state of fear. They fear being seen as weak, unworthy, or incompetent. They fear exposure, not in the sense of physical vulnerability, but in the sense of revealing their true selves, the selves that are riddled with doubt, shame, and anxiety about not measuring up. This fear is often so deep-seated that it compels them to manipulate their surroundings and the people in their lives to protect the image they've carefully curated. Their relationships become transactions, vehicles to either bolster their self-image or to ensure its preservation. They rely on the admiration and approval of others to maintain this fragile sense of self-worth. Without it, they feel empty, exposed, and utterly unprotected from the vulnerabilities they cannot face. This is why narcissists often seek out admiration, praise, and validation from others in excessive amounts. When they don't receive the adulation they expect, they feel rejected, invisible, and their deepest insecurities are brought to the surface. This need for constant validation doesn't come from a healthy sense of self-assurance. It stems from an underlying emptiness, a void within them that they can never quite fill. And this void, driven by deep feelings of inadequacy, is what pushes them to exaggerate their accomplishments, manipulate others, and create false narratives about who they are. They cannot bear to be seen as anything less than perfect. They cannot afford to be viewed as weak or unremarkable. The danger of this, of course, is that it drives them to act in ways that are destructive, both to themselves and to the people they encounter. They are constantly trying to maintain control over their image, often to the detriment of their relationships, their happiness, and even their own mental health. In order to protect this fragile sense of self, narcissists will often resort to deceit, exaggeration, or manipulation. They may surround themselves with people who continually stroke their ego, who tell them what they want to hear. They may downplay their mistakes, shift blame, or distort reality in an effort to preserve the grandiose narrative they've built. When someone challenges this narrative, whether by questioning their actions, pointing out flaws, or refusing to admire them, narcissists become enraged. This isn't just anger or defensiveness, it's existential panic. In those moments, they're not just defending their actions, but defending their very identity, which they see as inherently fragile. When this self-image is punctured or threatened, the narcissist feels a profound sense of vulnerability. The gap between the grandiose self they project and the weak, insecure self they desperately try to hide becomes painfully obvious. To avoid this uncomfortable reality, they will often do everything in their power to discredit or distance themselves from those who see them for who they truly are. In fact, they often prefer a world in which their self-image is unquestioned and unchallenged. The moment someone comes along and exposes the cracks in their facade, they feel unmoored, unprotected, and deeply uncomfortable. And yet, this fragile self-image is their greatest burden, the very thing that they protect most vigorously. This constructed sense of superiority is the thing that traps them in a cycle of insecurity and loneliness. They cannot engage with the world as it truly is because they're so preoccupied with managing the narrative of who they are. This constant need for validation and affirmation, this fear of exposure, ultimately creates a life marked by shallow relationships, emotional turmoil, and deep dissatisfaction. The very thing that they think will protect them from vulnerability, their inflated self-image, ends up being the source of their greatest suffering. And in their pursuit of maintaining this image, they often lose what matters most: authentic connections with others and a true sense of peace within themselves. Narcissists, despite their outward bravado and apparent indifference, often carry a hidden burden that few people ever see. It is a burden of silent regret, one that they rarely, if ever, acknowledge. Yet it is there, lurking beneath the surface. This secret regret is not something they are conscious of in the moment of their harmful actions, but it is a deep internal residue that follows them. The irony is that while they may seem unaffected, they are in fact carrying a psychological weight that becomes heavier the longer they suppress it. This is a burden they may never fully articulate to anyone, and sometimes they may not even be fully aware of it themselves. When a narcissist hurts someone, whether by betraying trust, manipulating emotions, or outright abusing another person, there's an underlying unspoken awareness of wrongdoing that quietly emerges. At the surface, they may be quick to justify their behavior or rationalize their actions. But underneath all of the denial, there's a sliver of truth they cannot completely escape. They know that they have crossed a line, even if their pride doesn't allow them to fully admit it. They may attempt to bury this truth in layers of defensiveness or anger, but it still lingers in the corners of their mind. This regret is often more subtle than most people would expect. It doesn't manifest as an overwhelming sense of guilt, nor does it come with tearful apologies. It's quieter and more insidious, creeping up in moments of solitude or reflection. Narcissists often live in a state of perpetual self-justification, and as long as they can maintain the illusion that they are right, superior, or beyond reproach, they can avoid confronting their actions. But the moment they are alone with their thoughts, when the distractions of their carefully curated life fade away, the regret finds its way to the surface. The pain of this silent regret is not always expressed outwardly, but it impacts their psyche in ways that are not immediately apparent. They might lash out in anger or become defensive when confronted, but underneath it all is the knowledge that they have hurt someone they once cared about or have violated a fundamental moral principle. This realization may be fleeting, but it's still present, like a shadow that follows them wherever they go. It's a quiet torment that nags at them, reminding them that they are not as invincible as they pretend to be. The conflict between their inflated self-image and the reality of their actions creates an ongoing internal struggle, one that they cannot easily escape. This hidden regret is not only a reflection of the harm they've caused to others, but also a reflection of the harm they've caused to themselves. Narcissists, despite their outward confidence, are often deeply insecure. Their sense of self-worth is not rooted in authentic achievement or self-acceptance, but rather in how others perceive them. When they hurt someone, they are not just damaging another person, they are also damaging their own self-concept. In the back of their mind, they know that their behavior, while perhaps temporarily effective in maintaining control or power, is ultimately hollow and destructive. And this knowledge gnaws at them, even if they refuse to acknowledge it fully. The emotional fallout from this silent regret is not something that can be easily shrugged off. It manifests as a deep, subtle dissatisfaction with themselves, a sense of emptiness that they cannot fill with external validation or material success. They might fill their lives with distractions, continue to pursue admiration from others, or inflate their sense of importance even more. But the void created by their own actions cannot be permanently ignored. The regret becomes a silent, invisible anchor that holds them back from ever finding true peace or contentment. They may never speak of it aloud, but the weight of their actions continues to haunt them in ways that are profound and enduring. Ultimately, this regret is part of the narcissist's internal contradiction. They project an image of self-sufficiency, control, and superiority, but beneath that image lies the undeniable truth that they have hurt others, and in doing so compromised their own integrity. The regret they carry silently is a reminder of their inability to reconcile the person they want to be with the person they actually are. It's a quiet truth that they will never fully face, but it remains an unspoken burden that shadows them for as long as they choose to live in denial. And this regret, though silent, becomes a defining aspect of their inner world, one they must carry with them, whether they admit it or not. When the narcissist's grandiose self-image is challenged or shattered, something inside them fractures as well. This is not just a moment of external loss, it is an internal reckoning, a deep existential crisis that they cannot easily escape. The very identity they have spent years constructing, layer by layer, is called into question. The mask they've worn for so long, the facade of superiority and control, is no longer sufficient to shield them from the reality of who they are and what they've done. This moment of confrontation, whether external or internal, can be a harrowing experience. For the narcissist, it represents more than just the loss of a relationship or a social standing. It is the sudden exposure of their deepest vulnerabilities. At the core of this reckoning is a stark realization. They are not the flawless, untouchable figures they have convinced themselves and others they are. They are flawed, fragile, and like everyone else, susceptible to the pain of rejection, failure, and imperfection. The narcissist may not express this realization openly, and they may go to great lengths to suppress it, but it lingers beneath the surface, creating an internal conflict that they cannot entirely escape. The narcissist is not often confronted with this painful truth by others. They are skilled at avoiding or deflecting such confrontations, building walls around themselves to keep the world at bay. But at some point, they cannot outrun their own conscience, whether it's a personal failure, a failed relationship, or a social defeat. The narcissist's own mind will eventually force them to confront the gap between the idealized version of themselves and the reality they have to live with. This confrontation doesn't always happen in an overt, dramatic way. It often occurs in the quietest moments, when they are alone with their thoughts and there is no one around to validate their sense of superiority. In these moments, the shame, insecurity, and fear that have been buried for so long rise to the surface. This internal reckoning can feel like an emotional earthquake, shaking the very foundation of who they believe themselves to be. It exposes the rawness of their own inadequacy, the underlying self-doubt that they've spent so much time and energy masking. And it's not just a fleeting moment of discomfort, it's a painful, lingering awareness that they are not in control of their narrative. The self they have spent so many years crafting, carefully curated, inflated, and defended no longer holds up under scrutiny. The mask they wear to protect themselves from vulnerability starts to crack. And in that moment, they must confront the uncomfortable reality that their image of perfection is just that, an image. This internal reckoning is often accompanied by a deep sense of panic. The narcissist fears not only the loss of their self-image, but the exposure of their inner weakness to the world. They fear being seen as flawed, as human, as anything less than the perfect, superior being they have tried so desperately to project. The idea of being vulnerable, of showing any sign of imperfection, is deeply terrifying to them. This fear of exposure often leads them to double down on their defensive mechanisms. They may become more aggressive, more manipulative, or more deceitful in an attempt to restore the image they have lost. In many cases, they will reframe the situation entirely, shifting blame, creating false narratives, and projecting their flaws onto others. But even as they try to reassert control over the situation, the truth remains that internal reckoning has already begun. The narcissist's inability to truly face this reckoning is what keeps them trapped in a cycle of self-deception and self-destruction. They may never fully confront the truth of their own vulnerability, because doing so would shatter the very foundation of their existence. Instead, they continue to build new layers of defense, new personas, new stories, new distractions, all in an attempt to avoid the discomfort of self-awareness. But the internal reckoning doesn't go away. It persists in the background, quietly undermining their sense of self. The more they fight it, the more it grows, because the truth cannot be silenced forever. This is why narcissists often struggle with maintaining healthy, meaningful relationships. The deeper they bury their truth, the further they drift from any possibility of genuine connection. Real relationships require vulnerability, openness, and acceptance of imperfection, things that the narcissist cannot afford to embrace. Their internal reckoning with their own flaws and insecurities keeps them from experiencing the true intimacy that comes from sharing one's authentic self. Instead, they remain locked in a battle with themselves, unable to fully connect with others because they cannot first connect with the truth of who they really are. And in this internal conflict, they are forced to live a life that is at its core disconnected from themselves, from others, and from the possibility of true peace. The narcissist's regret is not so much about the person they've hurt, but about the version of themselves they were when that person believed in them. This is an important distinction because it reveals a deeper truth about narcissism, namely that it is not the pain of another's suffering that weighs on the narcissist, but the loss of their own reflection in the eyes of the people they manipulate. At the heart of their actions, they do not just seek power over others, they seek validation, and they derive their sense of worth from being seen as something exceptional. In moments when they hurt someone, they aren't simply inflicting damage on another person. They are shattering the image of themselves that the other person holds. That image, once admired and trusted, is now tainted. And for the narcissist, that is the real loss. The narcissist thrives on being seen as special, as above others. They need the admiration of others to affirm their constructed identity. When someone genuinely believes in them, believes in their greatness, their worth, or their potential, they experience a profound sense of validation. That belief in them fills the hollow spaces within their psyche, providing temporary relief from the anxiety and insecurity that constantly plague them. But when they hurt someone, when they betray the trust of the person who once admired them, they lose that reflection. And this loss goes far beyond the person's departure or rejection. It's about losing the mirror they once gazed into, the mirror that reflected a better version of themselves. For the narcissist, this is a deeply painful realization, but it is also one they often cannot fully process. They are not necessarily mourning the person they hurt, nor are they reflecting on the damage they caused. Instead, they are mourning the lost admiration, the lost reflection of themselves that has now been irreparably altered. In the eyes of the person they have wronged, they are no longer the idealized version they once were. They are no longer the person that the other trusted or believed in. The admiration has vanished, and in its place, there is only disappointment, perhaps even contempt. The narcissist's regret is rooted in the awareness that they have lost the image they relied on to define themselves. What makes this regret even more complicated is the fact that the narcissist may never be able to express it. They may never verbalize that they miss the version of themselves that the other person saw, the good version, the one that they could mold and maintain for as long as it served them. The truth of this loss remains buried beneath layers of defensiveness and pride, but it eats away at them. The narcissist is left with the understanding that they have lost something far more important than a relationship or a connection. They have lost the validation they needed to feel whole. This realization, though often suppressed, has profound consequences on the narcissist's internal state. They may try to fill the void with more superficial praise or control, but these attempts only deepen their sense of emptiness. The more they chase after fleeting admiration, the more they are reminded that nothing truly fills the gap left by the loss of that original reflection. It's a paradox. They continue to seek what they have lost, but each attempt to recover it only drives them further away from true fulfillment. At its core, this type of regret reveals the narcissist's desperate need for external validation. They cannot look inward for reassurance or self-worth because their sense of identity is entirely dependent on how others perceive them. This dependency makes it impossible for them to process genuine emotional growth or self-reflection. The narcissist cannot heal from the pain they have caused because they are too focused on regaining the admiration that was once theirs. They can't understand that the real loss is not the admiration itself, but their inability to accept themselves without it. In essence, the narcissist's regret is not a deep, transformative emotional experience. It's a fleeting, shallow sorrow that arises when they realize that they have lost the ability to control how others see them. What they miss is not the person they hurt, but the distorted version of themselves that they projected onto that person. This silent grief becomes a continuous undercurrent in their life, driving them to repeat the same patterns of manipulation and deceit in a futile attempt to regain what was lost. an image of themselves that was never real to begin with. The silent torment that a narcissist experiences as a consequence of their actions is often the most profound and enduring form of justice they face. On the surface, it may appear that the narcissist walks through life unaffected by the damage they cause, impervious to the emotional wreckage they leave behind. After all, they tend to show little remorse, deflect blame, or rationalize their harmful behavior. They appear self-sufficient and in control, constantly managing their image and distancing themselves from any consequences that might tarnish their carefully constructed persona. But beneath this facade, there is an undercurrent of silent suffering, a quiet, ever-present weight that they cannot escape. This torment doesn't manifest in the way that people often expect. There are no public displays of guilt or shame, no heartfelt apologies, and no moments of contrition. Instead, it's a slow burn, a deep internal struggle that the narcissist cannot easily shake off. The narcissists need to maintain their superiority, their sense of control, and their image as someone who is beyond reproach keeps them trapped in a cycle of denial and self-deception. And when their actions come back to haunt them, when the consequences of their manipulation, betrayal, or cruelty can no longer be ignored, the narcissist faces a quiet reckoning that they can't easily suppress. The narcissist's greatest source of suffering is the inability to reconcile their need for validation with the reality of their actions. They crave admiration and control, and when they harm others, they're often left with the gnawing awareness that their ability to manipulate and dominate has come at a cost. They may try to fill the void with superficial relationships or external achievements, but these fleeting sources of validation can never provide the fulfillment they truly seek. The weight of their behavior lingers in the background, even if they never acknowledge it explicitly. This silent torment is not something they can escape through denial or distractions. It is a constant companion, a reminder of the cost of their actions. What makes this torment so insidious is that it is self-inflicted. The narcissist's refusal to accept their own vulnerability, to acknowledge their mistakes, and to confront the damage they've caused ensures that their internal suffering persists. Instead of seeking growth or redemption, they continue to engage in patterns of manipulation, deceit, and blame shifting, only deepening the hole they've dug for themselves. They become trapped in a cycle of self-justification and false superiority, each time attempting to outrun the consequences of their actions. But no matter how far they run, the burden of their behavior remains, quietly weighing on them. This silent torment is particularly cruel because it is something the narcissist must live with alone. While they may outwardly appear unaffected, the internal consequences of their actions are private, hidden from the view of others. They may put on a mask of indifference, but inside they know that they are not the perfect, invulnerable person they present to the world. The lack of genuine emotional connections in their life only exacerbates this inner anguish, because the narcissist struggles to form real vulnerable relationships that require honesty, accountability, and emotional depth. They are often left to grapple with the aftermath of their actions without the support or understanding of those they have hurt. The narcissist's torment is compounded by their inability to engage in true self-reflection, because their identity is so closely tied to external validation. They cannot accept the possibility that they are flawed or that they've hurt someone in a meaningful way. This refusal to look inward prevents them from processing their emotions, learning from their mistakes, or making amends. Instead, they are trapped in a perpetual state of denial and defensiveness, unable to break free from the cycle of self-deception. This is where the true cruelty of the narcissist's suffering lies. It is not simply that they hurt others, but that they are unable to grow or heal from their actions. They cannot find peace because they are not willing to face the truth about themselves. This silent torment also impacts the narcissist's sense of self-worth. While they may project an image of self-assurance and invulnerability, deep down they are constantly wrestling with a sense of emptiness and inadequacy. They're aware on some level that the image they present to the world is a lie, and this knowledge eats away at them. The more they try to maintain this illusion of perfection, the more they distance themselves from their authentic selves, and the more they intensify their internal conflict. The silent torment they experience is a result of this inner disconnect, the clash between the person they want to be and the person they know themselves to be. In many ways, this silent torment becomes the ultimate consequence for the narcissist. They may never face legal or social repercussions for their actions, but they carry the psychological burden of their choices with them every day. They may not show it, they may not acknowledge it, but it is there, and it is a form of justice that cannot be escaped. No manipulation, no deflection, no external validation can remove the quiet anguish that follows them. The more they try to outrun it, the more it grows. This torment, this internal suffering becomes their unspoken punishment, one that no one else can see, but one that defines their existence in ways that words can never capture. In the end, the narcissist's silent regret, though often unseen and unspoken, is perhaps the most enduring and profound consequence of their actions. It is not the loud, dramatic reckoning that many would expect, but a quiet, internal torment that erodes their sense of self, their ability to connect with others, and their capacity to find peace. They live in a constant tension between the inflated self-image they project and the hidden truth of their own vulnerability, inadequacy, and shame. Every relationship they damage, every person they manipulate, only deepens this inner conflict as they are forced to confront the loss of the admiration they so desperately seek. This silent anguish, unlike external consequences, is the unspoken justice they carry with them throughout their lives. It is a burden they cannot escape, no matter how much they try to outrun it, with distractions, new relationships, or false narratives. Ultimately, the narcissist's true torment is not the pain they cause others, but the loss of the idealized self they once believed they could maintain, and the deep loneliness that follows in its wake. It is this that becomes their lasting punishment, a punishment they silently endure, unable to truly heal or find peace.